Two women meet as friends, never knowing that their laughter, their late-night talks, and the comfort of being understood would slowly turn into something deeper. What begins as simple moments of companionship grows into a love they never expected, a love that challenges fear, breaks silence, and proves that sometimes the strongest relationships are the ones we never saw coming. It all began in the most ordinary way, the kind of meeting no one would ever expect to change their life. They had known of each other for years, walking in the same hallways, sometimes crossing paths in the same coffee shop, and occasionally sharing a smile that never went further than politeness. It wasn't until one afternoon when fate seemed to slow down that they truly found themselves in conversation. A casual gathering of mutual friends placed them side by side, and what started as small talk about books and music stretched into something neither of them wanted to end. Their laughter rose easily, almost surprising them both, and each new sentence felt like discovering a hidden part of themselves in someone else. It wasn't grand, it wasn't dramatic, it was simple, natural, and strangely comforting, the kind of connection that makes time feel less important. From that moment, friendship bloomed with a quiet certainty, as if the world had been waiting for them to find each other. They began to spend more time together, not because they planned it, but because it felt natural to gravitate toward one another. Study sessions turned into long conversations about fears and dreams. A quick walk together became an hour of wandering, talking about childhood stories and the things they never admitted to anyone else. Every word between them was soaked in trust, and every silence was filled with a kind of peace that neither of them had ever felt before. When one of them felt low, the other seemed to know exactly what to say, sometimes even before a word was spoken. That understanding was rare, and though they didn't have a name for it yet, they both treasured it deeply. There were nights when they texted until their eyes grew heavy, sending each other sleepy goodnights that left them smiling in the dark. There were mornings when one would bring the other coffee, just because she remembered how she liked it. It was in those little things, the unnoticed gestures, that the bond grew strong. A hand on the shoulder during a tough moment, a laugh shared over something silly, a glance across a crowded room that made the noise fade into nothing, all of it wove them closer together without either of them realizing how much it mattered. Friendship was what they called it, but beneath that word was something that carried a deeper weight, something they didn't yet dare to acknowledge. As the weeks passed, their lives started to fold into each other in quiet ways. Their friends began to notice how they sat close together, how they leaned in just a little more when speaking, how their inside jokes made them laugh uncontrollably while everyone else stayed confused. But to them, it wasn't strange, it was natural. They became each other's first call when something went wrong, and the first thought when something went right. They celebrated victories with pure joy, and they carried one another through struggles with gentle strength. Every day seemed brighter when shared, and even the dullest moments turned into memories worth keeping when they were together. One evening, they sat on the porch after a long day, the sun fading slowly into the horizon. The air was cool, and the world around them was quiet, but their conversation was alive, filled with dreams of what they wanted to do, where they wanted to go, and who they wanted to become. For a moment, she looked at her friend's face lit by the soft orange glow, and something stirred inside her chest, something she couldn't explain. It wasn't loud, it wasn't overwhelming, it was soft, warm, and unshakable. She looked away quickly, convincing herself it was nothing, but the feeling lingered long after the moment passed. The closeness they shared became something they both leaned on. When one felt insecure or afraid, the other stood steady, offering words that felt like shelter. They began to realize how deeply they could be themselves with each other, without masks, without fear of judgment. Vulnerability became easy, and with it came a comfort that was rare and precious. There were no expectations, no demands, only the quiet certainty that someone was there, always willing to listen, always ready to stand by their side. Friendship was supposed to feel good, but this felt like something more, something that touched the soul in ways they didn't yet understand. And yet, in all of this, neither of them dared to name what was quietly forming between them. They didn't question the quickening of their hearts when they laughed too long, or the way silence between them felt almost sacred. They didn't stop to analyze why they missed each other after just a day apart, or why simple goodbyes lingered in their thoughts long after they parted ways. It was safer to call it friendship, to protect the bond that meant so much. But deep inside, in places they kept hidden even from themselves, there was something undeniable growing, something that would one day change everything. The shift between friendship and something else was not loud or obvious. It crept in quietly, disguised in moments that looked ordinary to everyone else but carried an entirely different weight to them. She began to notice how her heart reacted whenever her friend brushed her arm while walking beside her, how her laughter sounded different when it came from her, richer and more meaningful. There were times when she caught herself staring, not in the way friends often do, but in the way someone stares when they are memorizing a face, when they want to carry that image with them into the quiet corners of the night. The feelings unsettled her because they weren't part of the plan. Friendship was safe, easy to explain. What she was feeling now was harder, more fragile, and if spoken out loud it could break the very bond that gave her life so much joy. One evening they were sitting together on the floor of her bedroom, surrounded by books and empty mugs of tea, talking about things that didn't matter to anyone but them. She noticed how close they were sitting, knees almost touching, shoulders brushing every now and then as they leaned in to speak. At one point her friend laughed so hard she leaned back against her, and the contact sent a shiver racing down her spine. It was nothing unusual on the surface, friends leaned on each other all the time, but her body reacted differently. Her heart thudded against her chest, and she found herself hoping the moment would last just a little longer. When it ended, she sat frozen, her mind swirling with questions she wasn't ready to answer. She began to replay small moments in her head, moments she had once dismissed as casual. The way her friend had brushed a strand of hair from her face during a windy walk. The way her eyes softened when she was listening with full attention. The way she remembered the tiniest details, like the fact that she hated strawberries but loved strawberry-scented candles. Each detail stacked upon the next, forming a picture that looked less like friendship and more like something far more intimate. She wondered if it was one-sided, if she was reading into things that weren't there. That fear became her constant companion, hovering at the edges of every warm exchange. It became harder to ignore. In the middle of conversations, she would catch herself wondering what it might feel like to hold her hand a little longer, not in comfort but in love. When she left, she wondered what it would feel like to kiss her in that very moment, to know if the spark she felt was shared. But every time those thoughts came, she pushed them away, hiding them beneath the label of best friend. It was safer that way, even though the truth kept pressing against her chest, refusing to be silenced for long. Her confusion grew deeper during one quiet night when they sat in her car after a long drive. Neither of them was ready to say goodbye, so they let the silence fill the air while the soft hum of the engine was the only sound around them. Her friend rested her head gently on her shoulder, and the world seemed to pause. The weight of that simple gesture was overwhelming, because in that moment it felt like more than comfort, more than habit. It felt like trust, like closeness, like something she had always longed for but never dared to admit. She sat there, afraid to move, afraid to breathe too loudly, because she didn't want to break the fragile perfection of that moment. Later that night, lying awake in her bed, she thought about what it meant. If it was only friendship, why did her heart ache so much when she imagined a life without her? If it was only friendship, why did she crave her presence so deeply? Why did she dream of her voice, her touch, her smile? These were not questions that came with easy answers. They were heavy, layered, and filled with risk. Loving her as a friend was already the best thing she had known. What if wanting more ruined everything? But once a heart begins to wake up, it cannot return to sleep. She found herself anticipating every message, every glance, every word. When her friend reached for her hand absent-mindedly while crossing the street, her pulse raced for the rest of the day. When they hugged goodbye, she noticed how long she lingered in that embrace, unwilling to let go too soon. Everything felt amplified, sharper, as though the universe had turned up the volume on her emotions. And deep down, beneath all her fear, she began to recognize what it really was. This wasn't just friendship anymore. It was love, fragile and unspoken, but real enough to change everything. Days turned into weeks, and the feelings that once felt like fleeting sparks now settled heavily in her chest, impossible to shake away. She began to notice how much emptier life felt when her friend wasn't there. A simple morning without her texts felt dull, as though the brightness had drained from the sky. A quiet evening without her laughter felt incomplete, like something important was missing from the air. She caught herself glancing at her phone too often, waiting for her name to light up the screen, and when it finally did, the joy she felt was almost ridiculous in its intensity. It was no longer just about wanting her presence, it had become about needing it, as if her happiness had learned how to breathe only when the other was near. She found herself remembering details that most people would forget. The way her friend crinkled her nose when she laughed too hard. The softness of her voice when she spoke about her dreams. The way her eyes widened when she was excited, or the way she chewed her lip when she was thinking deeply. These details haunted her, weaving themselves into her thoughts when she tried to sleep, slipping into her daydreams when she should have been working or studying. She would catch herself smiling alone, just from replaying a memory of something small, and then feel a pang of confusion and guilt for wanting more than she should. The longing became sharper when they were apart. She tried to brush it off as normal attachment, but the ache in her chest told her otherwise. Friends miss each other, yes, but this was different. This was a hollow emptiness that made the world feel a little colder, a little less safe, whenever her friend wasn't around. She realized she was comparing everyone else in her life to her, finding no one who could make her laugh the same way or bring her the same comfort. Every face she saw seemed duller, every conversation thinner, because no one else carried that spark she had found. And the more she realized this, the more undeniable her feelings became. There were moments that replayed in her mind with an intensity that startled her. Like the time they walked under the rain without umbrellas, laughing as they both got soaked, holding hands just to keep from slipping. The warmth of that hand lingered far longer than it should have. Or the evening they cooked dinner together, bumping into each other in the kitchen, exchanging playful banter until their laughter echoed through the small space. She remembered the closeness of that moment, how natural it felt to be side by side, as if they had been doing it forever. These weren't just memories of friendship anymore, they were fragments of something her heart wanted to hold on to forever, and yet, fear pressed in. What if she confessed these feelings and destroyed the bond that meant everything to her? What if love ruined the comfort of friendship, leaving nothing but broken pieces behind? She struggled with the weight of those questions, carrying them like a secret burden that no one else could see. She rehearsed conversations in her head, imagining how it might sound to admit the truth, only to back away from the thought at the last moment. She couldn't risk losing her. The idea of living without her was unbearable, so she chose silence, hiding her feelings beneath the safety of friendship. Even as they burned hotter each day late at night, when the world was quiet, she let herself imagine the possibility of more. She imagined what it would be like to hold her not as a friend but as someone she loved fully. She imagined waking up beside her, sharing every morning light and every heavy night. She imagined what it might feel like to hear the words "I love you" spoken back, not as a joke or a platonic phrase, but with the same depth of longing she carried inside her. These dreams were bittersweet, filling her with warmth only to remind her of the risk that kept her silent. Her heart grew restless. It was as though the walls around her emotions were cracking, and no matter how hard she tried to patch them, love kept spilling through. She started noticing the way her friend looked at her sometimes, lingering just a second too long, as if she, too, was caught in some unspoken storm. Was it her imagination? Was she seeing things because she wanted to? The doubt twisted inside her, but so did hope. Hope that maybe she wasn't alone in this, that maybe her feelings were mirrored in the heart she adored most. The longer she held on to the secret, the heavier it became. It was no longer enough to simply call her a friend when every fiber of her being longed for more. The weight of silence pressed harder each day, and though fear kept her quiet, her heart whispered the truth louder with every moment they spent together. Love was there, real, undeniable, and impossible to contain forever. The silence of her secret was beginning to suffocate her. For weeks she had carried it, letting it grow heavier each time they laughed together, each time their eyes met and lingered longer than they should. It reached a point where she could no longer keep the words inside, because every moment without saying them felt like a betrayal to her own heart. The thought terrified her. She knew the risk, knew how easily she could ruin the safest bond she had ever known. And yet, the thought of never confessing felt worse. It was late one evening when the weight finally became too much. They had been walking along the quiet streets after dinner, their steps slow, as if neither wanted the night to end. The air was crisp, filled with the faint hum of cicadas, and the sky stretched above them in a sea of fading stars. She kept stealing glances at her friend, memorizing the way her hair caught the glow of the streetlights, the softness of her smile, the warmth that radiated simply from being close. Her heart pounded with such force that she was sure it could be heard. Her mind kept urging her to stay silent, but her chest ached with the truth trying to claw its way out. They stopped near a small bench by the park, sitting down to rest. For a moment, they said nothing, just sat in the quiet comfort that had always come so naturally to them. But tonight, comfort felt tangled with tension. She fidgeted with her hands, trying to gather courage, her breaths uneven. Her friend noticed and tilted her head, her voice gentle, asking if something was wrong. That simple question, filled with genuine care, cracked open the wall she had built. Words trembled on her lips, fighting to be spoken. She hesitated, afraid of what might come once they were out, but she forced herself to meet her friend's eyes. Her voice came out unsteady, almost breaking as she whispered that there was something she had been hiding. The air between them tightened instantly, every second stretching painfully. She confessed, the words spilling out like a flood she could no longer hold back. She told her how she had started seeing her differently, how every laugh, every glance, every small touch had become something she carried deep inside. She admitted how she longed for her in ways that went beyond friendship, how she couldn't go another day pretending her feelings didn't exist. Her voice shook as she confessed her greatest fear, that by saying these words she might lose the most important person in her life. Tears gathered in her eyes before she could stop them, her chest heaving with the weight of vulnerability. She sat there in silence afterward, waiting, dreading, praying that she hadn't just destroyed everything. Her friend didn't speak right away. She sat still, her eyes wide and unreadable, as if the words needed time to sink in. That silence was unbearable, stretching like an eternity, making her feel exposed and foolish. But then something shifted. Her friend's lips curved into the faintest, softest smile, one that held no judgment, no rejection, only warmth. Her eyes shimmered with tears that matched her own, and in that moment, she felt the crushing weight of fear begin to lift. Her friend reached out, taking her trembling hand in both of hers, squeezing gently, grounding her back into the world. With a voice barely louder than a whisper, she said she had been feeling the same, that she too had been afraid to ruin what they had, but deep down had known her heart wanted more. The relief that flooded through her was overwhelming. Tears spilled freely as she leaned into her friend, the two of them holding each other in an embrace that felt different this time, softer, deeper, filled with unspoken promises. It was as if the world had shifted, unlocking a new chapter that had always been waiting for them. They sat together for a long time, speaking quietly, sharing the pieces of their hearts they had both hidden. Every word felt like a release, every confession a thread weaving them closer. For the first time, their bond was no longer trapped under the label of friendship. It was allowed to breathe, to exist in its truth, fragile yet unbreakable. That night changed everything, not in an explosive, dramatic way, but in the quiet certainty of knowing their feelings were shared. The fear of losing one another had held them back for so long, but now they could see the truth clearly. What they had wasn't something to fear, it was something to cherish. And though they didn't know what the future would bring, they knew they wanted to face it together, hand in hand, heart to heart, stepping into love that had been silently waiting for them all along. The days that followed their confession felt like stepping into an entirely new world, though the people around them wouldn't have guessed that anything had changed. To others, they were still the same two friends who laughed too loudly at private jokes, who walked side by side as if they had always belonged in each other's orbit. But for them, everything was different. Every glance carried a deeper meaning now, every word carried the weight of emotions no longer hidden. What once was silence filled with questions was now silence filled with certainty, and the air between them felt softer, warmer, like it had finally been given permission to breathe freely. They both moved carefully at first, unsure of how to navigate this new territory. It wasn't awkward so much as it was delicate, like holding a fragile piece of glass you didn't want to drop. They knew their love had always been there beneath the surface, but saying it out loud had made it real, and real came with its own kind of vulnerability. The first time their hands touched after that night, it wasn't by accident. She reached out intentionally, her palm brushing against hers with quiet courage, and when their fingers intertwined, neither of them pulled away. The feeling was electrifying, a spark that shot through them both, but also strangely calming, like it was the most natural thing in the world. They walked together in silence for a while, hearts pounding, their faces aching from the smiles they tried to hide. That simple gesture meant more than 1,000 words could. It wasn't just affection, it was a quiet promise, a confirmation that they were truly beginning this new chapter side by side. Their first kiss didn't come in a grand romantic setting, but in the stillness of a late-night conversation. They had been sitting in her room, surrounded by scattered notebooks and empty mugs, the soft hum of music in the background. The conversation drifted from light-hearted stories to deeper confessions, the kind that made them both vulnerable and alive. Somewhere in the middle of that moment, words faded and the silence between them grew heavy, charged. She found herself staring at her lips, wondering, fearing, aching. Before she could stop herself, she leaned in slightly, hesitant, giving her friend every chance to pull away. Instead, her friend closed the space, and their lips met in a gentle kiss that was both timid and powerful all at once. It wasn't perfect. There was nervous laughter, shaky breaths, and the uncertainty of two people stepping into something entirely new, but it was theirs. It was tender, real, and unforgettable. After that, love became woven into the small things. They still did all the ordinary things they always had, but now everything carried an extra layer of meaning. Cooking dinner together meant brushing shoulders and sneaking glances. Watching movies meant sitting close enough that their hands could rest together under the blanket, hearts racing at the contact. Even walking down the street felt different now that their fingers laced together openly, no longer hiding what they felt. There was a sweetness in this simplicity, a joy in knowing that even the most mundane moments could be transformed into memories because they were experienced together. Yet, with the joy came vulnerability. They both found themselves overthinking at times, afraid of saying or doing the wrong thing that might break this fragile beginning. She sometimes wondered if she was loving too much too fast, if she was overwhelming her. Her friend sometimes worried if she was giving enough, if her silences might be misread. These insecurities crept in quietly, threatening to cast shadows on their newfound love. But each time, they chose honesty. They talked, they reassured, they reminded each other that love wasn't about perfection, it was about showing up, about choosing each other again and again, even when it was messy, even when it was uncertain. As weeks passed, they began to settle into this new rhythm. Love became less about fear and more about comfort, less about the unknown and more about the beauty of being seen fully and accepted. She realized that being with her wasn't about fireworks every moment. It was about finding peace in the ordinary, strength in vulnerability, and joy in the smallest details. Their relationship wasn't about trying to impress or pretend, it was about being fully themselves, and in that space, love thrived. Every time they laughed together, every time they leaned on each other after a long day, every time they whispered "I'm here," they were building something stronger than either of them had imagined. Their love was new, tender, and still finding its shape, but it carried a depth that had been waiting quietly for years. They were no longer just best friends, they were something greater, something braver. The shift from friendship to love had not erased what they had, it had deepened it, turned it into a foundation that could hold even more. And though they both knew challenges would come, they also knew this: they wanted to face them together, hand in hand, heart to heart, trusting that what they had was worth every risk. Love gave them wings, but it also exposed them to winds they hadn't prepared for. In the first weeks after their confession, the world around them seemed unchanged, but inside they carried a new awareness that made every choice feel heavier. They were no longer just two friends sharing laughs and secrets, they were something deeper, something they hadn't named to anyone else yet. And that secrecy, though protective, began to create shadows of doubt. She would lie awake at night replaying the smallest moments, wondering if their love could survive once it wasn't hidden. Her friend carried her own worries too, but she often kept them tucked behind a brave smile. They both feared the same truth: the world could be cruel to people who loved differently. What if their love wasn't strong enough to bear that weight? The first crack in their quiet bubble appeared at a family gathering. She had brought her friend along, just as she had countless times before, but this time the closeness between them wasn't just friendship anymore. She was hyper-aware of every glance, every touch, even when they were small and innocent. When her aunt jokingly asked why the two of them weren't dating men, the laughter around the room felt like knives against her skin. She forced a smile, but inside she wanted to shield their love, to protect it from the judgment she feared would fall if anyone ever knew the truth. Later that night, her friend noticed her silence and asked what was wrong. She brushed it off, but in her heart the fear had taken root. Her friend had her own moment of doubt one afternoon when they were out together, walking through town. A group of strangers passed by, and though nothing was said aloud, she felt their eyes linger too long. Was it suspicion? Was it judgment? Or was it simply her own fear projecting meaning where there was none? Either way, her heart raced and she quickly dropped her hand, pretending it was nothing. The look in her lover's eyes stung: confusion, hurt, but also understanding. They didn't speak about it right away, but the distance hung between them like a shadow, reminding them both how fragile it felt to love openly, and yet, in the middle of the doubt, their bond grew stronger. They learned to talk about the fears that haunted them, the worries of rejection, the pain of being misunderstood. Some nights those conversations were heavy, filled with tears and the raw ache of honesty. She confessed how afraid she was of losing her if the world pushed too hard against them. Her friend admitted how much it hurt to feel like their love had to be hidden. They didn't have easy answers, but what mattered was that they listened, that they faced those fears together instead of apart. Each confession didn't weaken them, it stitched them closer, proving that love was not just about the happy moments but about holding each other steady through the storms. Slowly, courage began to replace some of the fear. It showed in small ways first. Holding hands a little longer in public, even if their palms were sweating with nerves. Sharing soft smiles across crowded rooms, unafraid of who might notice. Choosing not to hide every glance, not to silence every touch. These gestures weren't loud or defiant, but to them they were victories. Every step toward openness was a declaration: we love, and we are not ashamed. There were still setbacks, moments when they retreated into fear, but each time they came back stronger, learning that courage didn't mean being fearless, it meant choosing love despite the fear. In the quiet of their private world, their love only deepened. They found strength in the way they could be vulnerable with each other, in the way they could share their insecurities without judgment. She would trace gentle lines on her friend's hand, whispering promises that they would make it through together. Her friend would wipe away her tears after a long day, reminding her that she was enough, that they were enough. These moments of reassurance became the foundation on which they built their courage. The outside world might not always be kind, but within their bond, there was safety, there was belonging, there was truth. They began to dream again, daring to think about a future not shaped by fear but by choice. They spoke about traveling together, about living together one day, about creating a space that belonged only to them. Those dreams felt fragile but precious, like lanterns glowing in the dark. Each time they shared them, hope grew stronger, pushing back against the doubts. They realized that while the world might question them, what truly mattered was how fiercely they chose each other, again and again. By the end of those weeks, their love felt different. It wasn't just new and tender anymore, it was tested, stretched, and strengthened by the weight of fear and the choice to keep moving forward anyway. They knew more challenges would come, but they also knew this: their love was not something to be hidden in the shadows. It was a light, and even if it flickered, it would not go out as long as they held it together. The time came when their love could no longer exist only in private. It wasn't that they made some sudden decision to announce it to the world, it was more that the world eventually began to notice what was already so clear between them. The way they looked at each other, the way they leaned in too close during conversations, the way their laughter belonged more to each other than to anyone else, all of it spoke louder than words. Friends who once thought of them as inseparable companions began to raise eyebrows. Some teased with light-hearted jokes, calling them attached at the hip, while others whispered quietly, trying to decide if there was something more between them. At first they ignored it, pretending not to hear the speculation. But with each passing day, the truth became harder to keep hidden. Their love had grown too real, too strong, to be tucked away forever. The first real confrontation came during a gathering with a small group of mutual friends. One of them, half joking but with an edge of curiosity, asked if they were finally going to admit they were more than just best friends. The room fell into an uneasy silence, laughter lingering only in the air of those who didn't know how to handle the weight of the question. She felt her heart race, unsure whether to deny, deflect, or finally tell the truth. Her friend reached for her hand under the table, squeezing gently as if to say, "It's okay, we don't have to hide anymore." She lifted her eyes, searching for strength in the face across from her, and then with a shaky but determined voice, she admitted softly that yes, they were more. The silence that followed was heavy, but it was also freeing. Some friends smiled, some shifted uncomfortably, but the world did not end. They walked away that night knowing that even though not everyone would understand, their love had just taken a step into the open. Not all reactions were kind. When her family found out, the air at home turned tense. Questions were asked with disapproval hiding beneath them. Some of the words cut deep, wrapped in disappointment or disbelief, as if loving another woman was something unnatural, something to be ashamed of. She cried that night in the safety of her lover's arms, the pain of rejection breaking through her chest. But her partner held her tightly, whispering that they would face it together, that one day love would prove itself stronger than prejudice. It wasn't easy. The sting of not being accepted by the people who raised you is a wound that runs deep, and there were days when she questioned if it was worth the fight. Yet every time doubt threatened to consume her, she looked into the eyes of the woman who had become her home, and the answer was clear: yes, it was worth everything. There were also strangers who reminded them of the world's cruelty. Walking down the street holding hands became both an act of love and quiet defiance. Sometimes they were met with smiles, but other times with glares or whispers that carried venom. The first time someone muttered a hateful word as they passed, she felt her stomach twist with fear and shame. She almost let go of her partner's hand, but instead, her lover gripped tighter, holding firm, refusing to let the world steal their courage. That moment became a symbol for them both. Love, in its purest form, was not something to hide. It was something to protect, even if it meant standing against the weight of judgment. But not every part of facing the world was painful. With each obstacle came growth, and with growth came unexpected moments of triumph. Some friends who had once been unsure began to show real support, standing by them with kindness and encouragement. There were nights spent with chosen family, laughing and celebrating love without fear of judgment, reminding them that acceptance could exist and that community could be built even when blood ties faltered. They learned that family could mean more than those who shared your name. It could be the people who chose to stand with you, who celebrated your love simply because it was love. Through it all, their connection deepened. Each hardship tested them, but each time they chose each other again, they emerged stronger. They found themselves leaning not just on love but on resilience. They began to realize that while the world's opinion mattered, it would never matter more than the bond they shared. And that bond became a shield against the harshness outside, a safe place they carried within one another. It gave them courage to walk into crowded rooms without shrinking, to speak their truth without shame, to hold hands in daylight and not let go even when eyes followed. They began to talk not just about the present but about what it meant to build a future in a world that might not always welcome them. These talks were heavy sometimes, filled with uncertainty about where they would live, how people would treat them, whether society would ever fully accept who they were. But they also dreamed boldly. They spoke about a home filled with warmth, about adventures they wanted to take together, about a love that could last forever despite the odds. Every dream became an anchor, pulling them forward through the storms, reminding them why they were choosing this path together. Why now? Love was no longer just an unspoken truth between them. It had become a declaration, not through speeches or grand gestures, but through the everyday courage of living honestly. Their story was not perfect, but it was real, and real was enough. They had faced rejection, whispers, and doubt, but they had also found strength, support, and moments of pure joy that made every struggle worth it. More than anything, they had found that the greatest victory was not convincing the world to accept them, it was learning to accept themselves fully, to walk in their truth, and to love each other with unapologetic hearts. The years that followed were shaped by both the storms they had weathered and the love that had carried them through. What began as a quiet friendship, then blossomed into secret affection, had now transformed into something steady and enduring. Their love was no longer fragile, no longer trembling under the weight of fear. It had been tested, questioned, even bruised by the harshness of the world, but it had not broken. Instead, it had grown roots so deep that nothing could tear it away. They had learned to stand tall in the face of doubt, to walk with courage even when the air around them felt heavy, and to remind each other that home was not a place but the heart they had found in one another. And with that strength, they began to truly imagine forever, not as a distant fantasy but as a life they were already building. Their mornings became sacred rituals. She would wake to the soft sound of her lover's breathing, to the warmth of her body beside her, and every day it struck her how extraordinary it was to have this closeness, this constant presence of love. They would share coffee in the quiet glow of dawn, talking about nothing and everything at once. Plans for the day, dreams for the future, fears they still carried, all of it spilled easily between them, because there was no longer anything to hide. In those small moments, they realized that forever was not built in grand declarations but in the steady rhythm of choosing each other day after day. Their families remained complicated, some ties never fully mended, but they learned to stop waiting for acceptance that might never come. Instead, they surrounded themselves with people who celebrated them, who saw their love as something beautiful rather than something to explain away. Holidays became less about tradition and more about creating their own rituals, a dinner with friends who felt like family, quiet nights with laughter echoing in the air, and a sense of belonging that came not from blood but from choice. It hurt, of course, to know some hearts would always remain closed, but they found peace in knowing that love did not need universal approval to be real. Love needed only the two of them, steadfast and true. They also began to dream bigger, not just for themselves but for the life they wanted to shape together. They spoke about a home where every corner reflected their shared journey. A kitchen filled with music as they cooked side by side. A garden where they could drink tea on quiet evenings. A space where photographs lined the walls, telling the story of how they met, how they loved, how they endured. They talked about traveling, exploring places neither of them had ever seen, holding hands in foreign cities without caring who might watch. Each dream was a brushstroke painting the future they wanted, and each day they took small steps to make those dreams real. Their love deepened in ways they hadn't expected. It wasn't always easy, there were arguments, days of frustration, moments of doubt, but even in those moments, there was never a question of leaving. Every disagreement ended with the same truth: they would choose each other again. That knowledge gave them a security neither had ever known before. They didn't need perfection, they needed honesty, forgiveness, and the willingness to keep building even when walls cracked. They learned that forever wasn't about avoiding struggles but about facing them with hands clasped tightly, with hearts that refused to let go. One evening, years after that first nervous confession, they found themselves back at the same park bench where the truth had first been spoken. The night air was cool, the stars scattered across the sky just as they had been then. They sat together in silence, memories weaving between them, both remembering how their voices had trembled, how fear had nearly silenced what love was desperate to say. Now, sitting side by side, there was no fear, only gratitude. Gratitude that they had taken the risk, that they had held on through the storms, that they had turned friendship into something everlasting. She turned to her lover and whispered that she couldn't imagine a life without her, that she didn't want just years but every year, every moment, every breath. And without hesitation, her partner smiled, eyes shining, and whispered back that she already had it, that forever had begun the moment they chose each other. Their story was not a fairy tale, not a perfect romance untouched by struggle. It was something richer, a story of courage, of choosing love in a world that sometimes tried to deny it, of building a life from whispers and laughter, from tears and resilience. They had started as two friends finding comfort in each other, never knowing it would lead to something so much greater. And now, as they walked hand in hand into the future, they carried with them not only the memories of where they had been but the certainty of where they were going. From friendship to love, from doubt to trust, from fear to forever, their journey was proof that the truest love is not always the loudest, but the one that endures, quietly, bravely, endlessly.